Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to be joined today by Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, who joins us each week to give us a brief overview of the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. And if you would like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Afnaf, and good evening from Israel. We're going to start really sort of even last week a little bit, or towards the end of last week, and sort of sum up Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip to the US, first foreign leader to meet with Donald Trump. It was a tremendously positive event, certainly from Netanyahu's point of view. Everything he wanted, let's just say almost everything he wanted, took place. I'm sure behind the scenes even more so. He was happy to let Donald Trump lead during the press conferences, and basically he just took a bit of a backseat, grinning in the background. We will undoubtedly see in the next elections that clip of President Trump saying that there's no better leader in Israel, Netanyahu is the best, something like that. That will be used ad nauseum throughout the campaign, and you could see Netanyahu's mind just really enjoying these moments. He really did leave with a lot of what he wants, as I said, great optics, really a return to no daylight between Israel and America. In fact, if there's anything less than no daylight, I think we'd be talking about that. Full of praise, as I said. And what did seem to be happening is that there was a lot in there that could perhaps make Bezalel Smotrich pause and think whether he wants to leave this government. The other thing that Netanyahu will be pleased about, and I will say to an extent, and I'll explain why in a second, is that Trump was just so effusive about what he wanted to happen in the region, especially with Israel, that it's going to be quite hard for someone like Bezalel Smotrich to leave the government, even if, as his previous threat that he will leave if phase 2 of the hostage deal takes place, it will be very hard to explain to his people why he brought down a right-wing government as a very supportive US president takes office. However, what Netanyahu won't be as pleased about is the focus on voluntary or not quite clear, immigration of Gazans. It's clear that when a US president, tacks to the right of the Israeli prime minister, it causes him problems, because then it raises the expectation on his right wing. What is Netanyahu doing about it? Is he helping? Is he not? Notice that of all Netanyahu's statements, especially at the beginning, none of them were an absolute unequivocal backing of this Trump plan. Even today, he calls it a good idea. He calls it one of the best ideas. He has never fully endorsed it. Perhaps because he knows it's a great challenge, perhaps because he knows that it could prove a problem. If you move 1.8 Gazans to Jordan and Egypt, then you basically just put the problem on an even larger border. You perhaps destabilize Jordan, which already has a massive demographic problem with Palestinians. You bring in the Muslim Brotherhood in greater numbers to Egypt, etc., etc. So he knows the challenges, and he knows that it's probably not a plan that he sees happening, and certainly not one that he can necessarily get on board. So that could create a problem, because now you have not just in Itamar Ben-Gvir, who, by the way, as I said earlier, started to walk back his decision to leave the government. Not officially, he's not going back into the government, but he certainly was closer to the government as a result of some of the things that President Trump said. But it does create that expectation. How can Netanyahu not be working towards this voluntary emigration, if you will, if the US president is 100% squarely behind it. And I think today, after so many comments and so many different scenarios and situations, it's no longer a slip of the tongue. This is a plan of Donald Trump. And as we saw, I think it was last night, he brought it up with King Abdullah, who looked extremely nervous and came prepared a little bit and said that he's going to bring 2,000 children out of Gaza for cancer treatment, which also seemed to put Donald Trump a little bit off guard. And he welcomed that, even though 2,000 children for a temporary treatment is not exactly what he claims that he had in mind. So at the end of the day, the trip to the US, the Trump plan, the voluntary or not emigration of Gaza somewhere else is something which his right-wing members will be dreaming about, but not necessarily something that Bibi would enjoy to its fullest, because he knows of the challenges, the practical challenges, and also because now he knows that he can't be any less than the US president. After claiming for the last few years that the US president was too dovish, now it's very hard for him to claim that the US president is too hawkish. All of the euphoria from the trip, though, and certainly there was a lot of euphoria, even though there was a lot of complaints that Netanyahu did not need to stay in the US until Saturday night, considering the meeting with Trump took place on Tuesday. But he came home after one of the more horrific moments of this war, where we saw three male hostages, returned to Israel. The connection in the minds of many went back 80 years to those who left the concentration camps. And there's a big debate in Israel whether it's appropriate to make that comparison or not. But the fact that it was made just shows the abject horror in Israel upon seeing these three men, gaunt, gray, clearly suffering. And some of the details that have come out since really show the abject suffering of these three, and the details that came out further of some of the hostages who have not yet been released shows that their situation is far better than the ones that have been left behind, which for those who are pro-deal has places a greater emphasis on trying to get out more people more quickly. And on the other side, they've shown the sort of more hawkish elements, really, again, the monstrous barbarity of Hamas in this particular war. And perhaps this is not an entity, this is not an organization which we should have running the strip. And let's be clear, I've said this before, that if this deal goes through all its phases, it will mean Hamas remains in power, with all that that means. Then we had earlier in the week the big bombshell that Hamas will not release another contingent of three on Saturday, as it's supposed to be, according to the timetable of the hostage agreement, the first phase. That really was the big bombshell of the week. And remarkably, the first person to comment on this seemed to be President Trump, who basically came out with his now de rigueur, all hell break loose if they are not released. And he mentioned the time of 12 o'clock midday, Israel time. But the big question that a lot of people had, which clearly caught a lot of people on this side a little bit by surprise, is what did he mean by all hostages? Did he mean just the three? Did he mean all of the hostages which are still alive in phase one, or did he mean even all the hostages? It's clear that in Israel they were not quite sure, because there was a slew of press releases, of media advisories that came out that night from the prime minister's office, or a senior diplomatic or political source, which is almost always code word for the same prime minister's office, which went back and forth, threatening that if the timetable didn't go through, then Israel would return to war. And then the debate was, and then another one that said just hostages, or all the hostages. And behind the scenes, they were giving a bit of off record that the Israeli government prime minister's office meant all the hostages, because he couldn't be seen as less hawkish than Donald Trump once again. And then they walked that back even again and said, no, they were just saying that as long as the three hostages will be released on Saturday according to the timetable, then everything will be okay. It seems to have had its effect. There were very intense negotiations over the last couple of days, exactly what's going to happen. But the threats, once again, probably more from Trump than from Netanyahu, seem to have had their effect. And it does seem, although not officially yet, that Hamas are coming down from that high ladder that they place themselves. My reckoning is that the likelihood is that that it will take place. Already now we've seen certain trucks and even sort of caravans coming into Gaza Strip. Obviously, that's not official. Netanyahu would never come out officially with that, but it does seem like there appears to be a narrowing of the gaps in this episode. I don't think there'll be more than three on Saturday. The question is whether there'll be another three during the week, like there was last time there was a major crisis and the pressure was put on, or we go back to the timetable of every Saturday. We'll have to wait and see, but my prediction is that this will be sorted out and there will be three released on Saturday. Hamas tried and tested, and once again, the US backed Israel to a hilt. And in fact, as I said in the previous example, was even more hawkish than perhaps Israel would have liked it to be, and kind of put Israel then up that very high ladder, which it now seems to have walked down. And again, probably at the end of the day, we're just going to go back to the regular timetable. That's my prediction. You never know. Nothing's certain. Hamas have not officially said that, but it does seem to be the direction we're going. Because of that, there has been no movement on phase two. There's a big debate whether Israel and Netanyahu specifically is really trying to get to phase two, as I said, because going to phase two means ostensibly, at least if we take Smotrich at his word, then Bibi loses his majority, and we could then have a situation where either this government limps on without a majority, or there's a no confidence vote and we go to elections. What we always have to do, and I would argue keeps Netanyahu up at night more than anything else, is the date of March 31st. Again, I keep repeating it, and I'll say it again because it is an important date that stands in the background of almost everything that happens in Israeli politics. If there is not a budget passed by March 31st, we go for elections. There doesn't need to be a vote, nothing automatically. A budget has to pass 3 months into a calendar year. And at the moment, he doesn't just have the problem of Smotrich, he also has the problem of the ultra-Orthodox, who also don't seem to be coming down from their ladder too much, that have said that we will not vote for the budget if there is not a law which basically allows the ultra-Orthodox community not to go to the army. At the moment, it seems that the major player here, Yuli Edelstein, who is in that vital role as chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, the committee in the Knesset that's supposed to debate the law, is dragging his feet, is saying, I need a proper law. It has to have proper sanctions in it. It has to bite. It has to hurt those who negate the law. And it has to have real numbers. Yisrael Katz, defense minister, has put up something which most in Israel, and even I would say a large number outside of the ultra-Orthodox parties within the cabinet, within the government, are against, which basically puts everything off, kicks the can down the table, a can down the road, which is something that Netanyahu definitely seeks. It's clear that Yisrael Katz is doing the bidding of Netanyahu, but at the moment, there doesn't seem to be a compromise. All of this, I'm sure Netanyahu is making the case that we dare not lose this opportunity. We have an extremely pro-Israel president who's talking about all different things. He's even supposed to speak about the issue of sovereignty over the next couple of weeks. That's something that Smotrich and Ben Gvir and many in the Likud, and perhaps even some in the ultra-Orthodox parties, will be waiting to hear, because that will be crucial to maybe maintaining this government beyond that date. As I always say, you don't bet against Bibi. He always finds a way, sort of, jump between the raindrops and manages to survive. Finally, which is also adding to Netanyahu's woes, it comes out today that as Israel is negotiating the release of the hostages. One of the major players here is Qatar, that's always backed Hamas. In fact, many of the Hamas leaders remain in Qatar. And it's now comes out that at least 3 of Netanyahu's advisors, 2 current advisors and 1 former advisor, were actually on the Qatar payroll. And one was even doing public relations for Qatar during the negotiations, which definitely is something which is causing a lot of talk here in Israel. So there's a lot for Bibi to take. He returned today to the court for his criminal trial. Again, there's a lot going on. He's trying to keep a lot of plates spinning in the air at the same time. He only has, as I said, really around 6 weeks. And let's not forget, that's there's only a certain amount of days you can legislate in that time to pass the budget, perhaps to deal with the ultra-Orthodox issue, perhaps to try and find some way of going to something close to phase phase 2. Perhaps he'll call it something else, but it will be phase 2 in essence. And that will be enough to keep Smotrich in. Perhaps there'll be something thrown from the White House, perhaps to do with sovereignty, that will make Smotrich think twice and hold his nose and continue the hostage deal if there's a trade-off in Israel's sovereignty. In fact, Smotrich today and his whole party introduced a law to confer sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank. This is a test for Netanyahu. This is a push. This is perhaps to say this is really what we want, but also it could be the first salvo in a potential election campaign, understanding that that's what some of his voters want. So he can say that he left the government because of a lack of sovereignty, even though at the end of the day, it may be something other than that, like a budget. So, as I said, a lot for Netanyahu to think about in the next few weeks. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I'll begin with a question pertaining to the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump. It seems like Prime Minister Netanyahu was genuinely caught off guard when President Trump insisted on a noon deadline to get the hostages back. Was he genuinely taken off guard? Do you know of any advance warning or any advance notice that he had of this comment?
I believe he was caught off guard. There have been these rumors which have been put out by the highest political levels that everything was coordinated, but it's clear that it wasn't. The fact that yesterday they put out 4 different press releases that contradicted each other, going back and forth. You can imagine the hostage family, the families of the hostages didn't know what to believe, what to think. Are we talking about just 3 hostages? Are we talking about all the hostages? Are we talking about Saturday? Are we talking about the next few days? I mean, they really went all over the place. So it's clear that that was a Prime Minister's office in panic. They were caught unawares. This was clearly not coordinated at all. And they didn't really know how to deal with this. On the one hand, they had to look as strong, as hawkish as the US president. But on the other hand, they also knew what was going on in the negotiations, and they knew what was achievable. And at the end of the day, they also probably understood that the threat was enough to push Hamas back to the regular timetable. And in Israel, the decision was made that that's enough at this time. If they can push more, they will. But the idea that by Saturday, 12 noon, all of the alive hostages in the first phase will be released is something that they knew would not happen. So that's why they had to walk their comments back, despite Donald Trump confirming that he did mean exactly that in his comments.
Thank you. Now, going back to your comments about the 3 hostages that were released recently in very abysmal condition. Supposedly, they were in the best condition of all of the remaining hostages. Now, if no more of these hostages get released, what do you think will be different this time around should Israel resume its war against Hamas?
Well, first of all, I should have said that part of the pressure on Hamas were these threats that if the 3 hostages or more were not released, then Israel would go back, and according to Defense Minister Katz, in an even more concerted and strong way than before. He, I think, even used the words or copied the words of Donald Trump, "All hell will break loose." And in fact, there has been movement with the Israeli army. They are readying plans. Again, whether they believe that they need to or not, they are certainly readying plans to go back to fighting if on Saturday there is no release of these next three hostages. But yes, you're right. What these three hostages and some of the other recently released say are the conditions of some of the others left behind. They say it's really dire. Let's not forget that a large number of those who are going to be released in phase two are soldiers, and it's clear from all evidence and everything that's come out that they are in the worst condition. The male soldiers have been treated the worst. They've been interrogated, they've been tortured. Some of them are still have wounds in them. I mean, some of the I won't go graphically into what some of has been sort of discussed in the media, sort of off record and discussed, sort of in every home, where someone knows someone. It's a very small country. Some of the details are horrific. Even what they went through, the three who were released, they said they were chained, they were kept in cages, they were tortured. They had one Peter between several people every few days. Yeah, the situation is very bad, and they do say that the situation of many, if not most of the others, is even worse. So that has given sort of a tailwind to the hostage families who have said, time is of the essence. We can't do this anymore. Every week, three, and especially as there's no movement on negotiations for phase B yet. So there's been a real tick in the demonstrations from the supporters of the deal. But it's also on the other side, as I said, it's given a sort of insight into who we're dealing with once again. And it's given a sort of tailwind to those who say, these are not people that we can leave in power. We tried that. We can't go back to October 6th. So it's really sort of radicalized the discussion in Israel between those who are for and against the deal.
Right, thank you. Now, Egypt has said that they will submit a plan to rebuild Gaza while Gazans remain in Gaza. Do you think that this is possible while Israel needs to defeat Hamas in the event that the hostages are not released?
Well, one thing you've got to give Donald Trump credit for is whether you think that they're realistic, outlandish, or not, some of his comments, they certainly make people think. They certainly make people act. And the fact that the Egyptians, with some of the other partners in the Arab world, are already coming up with a plan is only because of Donald Trump's idea. No one's seen the plan yet. It's probably just going to be a rehashing of what's happened before, building it up, billions of dollars invested, rebuilding. It will take a few years. But Egypt does not want any large amount of Gazans to leave. Jordan does not want any large amount of Gazans to leave. In fact, there's very, very few who want this. They don't like the plan, despite Donald Trump keep on saying that they will come round to it. You could see the nervousness, the discomfort of the King of Jordan yesterday in that press conference, where his twitching really came out. There were a lot of people were noticing that, the body language. And interestingly enough, there's been many demonstrations against him in Jordan as a result of this. And there's also been in Egypt as well. And President Sisi at the moment has taken a more hawkish position on this and understood that he cannot be seen going to Washington, and while a US president is sitting right next to him talking about the fact that they have to take hundreds of thousands or a million Palestinians. So at the moment, President Sisi is saying he will not go to the White House while this issue is being talked about. He will certainly not do that sit down. So a lot of the internal politics in Egypt and Jordan are playing out in this, and Egypt is looking for support from the Arab world, because, as Donald Trump likes to mention again and again, and it's very true, and it's a very important factor, both Egypt and Jordan are heavily supported financially and militarily. So these are very important things. So there's only a certain amount that either of these leaders can do to thumb their nose, and that's why King Abdullah had to go, because he needs America more. But the Egyptian president is in a little bit of more of a stable position, even though he does need American largesse. but he does have a more rested population. And because he saw the reaction of the Jordanians and he sees the reaction of the Egyptians at the moment, he's staying put and standing firm. But we'll have to see how long that maintains itself.
Well, thank you. Now, Egypt and Jordan are, of course, the key actors here because of their proximity and their history to the conflict. But is there any indication that there are other Arab states that will be pulled into this deal, into this negotiation to resettle Gaza?
I mean, at the moment, President Trump keeps on mentioning those two, Jordan and Egypt. It's unclear why. Probably they're the two states. I mean, Egypt in the Sinai has a lot of room and it has a massive population. So to add a few 100,000, or even a million, or even 2 million isn't going to upset the demographic balance. However, his biggest enemy in the country is, of course, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas are the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood. So does he really need another million or whatever it is radicalized Muslim Brotherhood supporters or members that are going to enter into Egypt? Absolutely, he does not want that. And that's why they built one of the strongest borders in the region. Jordan certainly doesn't want it because of the demographic issues. As we've seen from these demonstrations, King Abdullah is getting less popular by the day, and he's teetering. And the Iranians are certainly working there, trying to whip up this opposition as well. There was mention of Saudi Arabia, but that was by Prime Minister Netanyahu in an off-cuff remark I think he made to a Fox News, if I'm not much mistaken. He said there's a lot of room there. That was a slip of the tongue. That's not something that Netanyahu really knows could happen. The Saudis would be against it. And certainly if he wants to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia in the near future, he certainly can't be saying that again. But apart from that, there are no Arab nations who will come forward, certainly not publicly, because it would look very bad. And so at the moment, any country that's been mentioned, whether it's Indonesia or Albania or wherever it is, has resisted the idea because no one wants to be that country to take them in, because they would get a lot of threats and a lot of bad press. And again, how are you bringing hundreds of thousands of people to a far away country? So it's really, as I said, it's a very challenging idea, something that the far right in Israel has embraced. But Netanyahu knows that the idea of emptying out the Gaza Strip of 2 million people, 1.8, whatever it must be, practically speaking, it's a very difficult idea. Perhaps Donald Trump laid out his ideas in their sort of meeting one-on-one. But as I said, the fact that Netanyahu hasn't openly and enthusiastically endorsed the plan, I think tells you a lot about it.
Thank you. Now, how risky is an Israeli withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor, which appears to be a condition of the deal?
What's supposed to even be coming towards the end of phase A. And there are some in the government, I think even a few ministers in Likud, who have said that for them is a red line. That's something which is extremely problematic, because let's not forget that is the line separating Gaza Strip to Egypt, where all of the arms, all of the weaponry, some of the militants themselves, the money, everything came through there, which basically propped up the Hamas regime for all these years. And now Israel is on that border. It's destroyed, I don't know if all the tunnels, but many of the tunnels. That is a lifeline which has been lost to Hamas, even though there are hundreds of humanitarian trucks, which they basically steal every single day and then sell and make their millions that way. But if Israel does remove itself from the Philadelphia corridor, it certainly would return that lifeline to Hamas. And there is a great concern within the security establishment, within many parts of Israeli society, that is a game changer. And it would basically mean that Hamas would be able to reestablish itself, rearm itself, and perhaps, as they've said themselves, do another October 7th further down the line.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. We have unfortunately reached the end of the podcast for this week. I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us and update us.
Thank you.
course. Now, for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout for a podcast on Monday with MEF writing fellow Hussein Abubakar Mansour. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the Middle East Forum's YouTube channel. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, and anywhere you get your podcasts. And please feel free, if you are in the area or if you are in the country or nationwide, to join the Middle East Forum for our annual policy conference in Washington, D.C. from May 19th to May 21st. You can register online at meforum.org/policyconference 2025, all one word. As always, I thank you again for your participation and your viewership, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.